I believe that's important to notice that Canada did some tremendous help and work. If you go from a historical way of seeing it, like at the end of the Cold War, Canada, especially in Central America in the 80s, Canada was supporting the democratic transition and helped a lot of human rights defenders who were persecuted by authoritarian and military regime in the 80s, like in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. In fact, there's a lot of refugees from Central America who came to Canada during those years. And prior to that, there was our policy towards Chile after the coup against Salvador, the former 9/11, 11 September of 1973. And in right now, there's a lot of examples, Haiti, Peru, but more recently, I would mention two, like the beginning of the 21st century. First, with the Colombian peace process, Canada was involved promoting the peace process during the period of Santos, but at the same time, with the international aid, supporting all the transitional mechanism that were put in place in Colombia since 2017. So that's like one of the good things we're doing with internet or official aid. And the other example that I would like to mention, because it's not well known, but it's the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, CICIG, which was created in 2006, implemented in 2007, and did tremendous work in Guatemala until its closing in 2019. This was like a sui generis transitional mechanism in which, like, through international cooperation, like from the major donor country in Guatemala, like Canada, the EU, the United States, they were financing that with UN, this new commission to strengthen the rule of law, because even though the armed conflict had ended in 1996, there was still human rights violation and impunity that was ravaging the country, like until the beginning of the 21st century. Therefore, by strengthening the rule of law, they managed like to finance this commission, who did some incredible work that is very linked to a lot of like the strategic human rights litigation that occurred in Guatemala between 2009 and 2013, like the genocide trial against Rios Montt, the Sepuzarco case in 2016 against domestic violence and sexual exploitation of indigenous women during an armed conflict. Those kind of trials, which were impossible to imagine in a country like Guatemala, were made possible through this conjuncture of the CICIG work, but also international aid, going through some of those NGOs that were working to strengthen the legal capacity of their partners in Guatemala to go in trial. That's something interesting that's not too well known, I believe. It's the Guatemala National Court. It was the first time that a national court condemned a former like statesman, a head of state, for genocide.
Okay, and that's the case who came back and said there was a technical error and he was free.
But then the case started over again, and he did a Pinochet of himself, so he died while waiting to be prosecuted and trial again.
Okay. It didn't go to the Inter-American Court?
This case, well, there were another case related that went to the Inter-American Court, La Massacre of Dos Eres and Rio Negro. But those cases kind of like, they were overlapping, but they were not heading to the head of state. It was against officers. So, and the strategy was going to prosecute like low-level military men to go up to the top. And for the Rios Montt, it was a national case.
And for those cases, I don't want to put you on the spot like that. They were important for which reason, in your point of view?
Well, I mean, for justice for the victims, I mean, we have to remind that in the Guatemalan case, like there were more than 200,000 victims, and about 80% of those victims were indigenous Mayan population. And there was a genocide that was committed there between 1978 and 1983. It was documented by two through commission, one which was sponsored by the UN in 1999, and it said like there were genocide acts committed against the indigenous population. But it took, I mean, from that point of view, if the acts were committed at the beginning of the 80s, it took almost 3 decades for the survivors and the victims. Finally, they acknowledge, like the state acknowledged this responsibility, and therefore they have a sense of justice. So yes, I believe it is important because it also proved that it was possible to prosecute people who were until then untouchables.